Everything you thought you knew about Minato Namikaze was a lie. There was a time when fans didn't question it. The fourth Hokage, the yellow flash of the leaf, was the strongest ninja to ever live. A name that alone struck fear into armies. A man so fast, so brilliant, that entire battlefields froze at the thought of facing him. But what if I told you that wasn't always the plan? That somewhere along the way, Kishimoto rewrote his own legend and quietly replaced the god we thought we knew? Before we go deeper, if you love diving into the secrets, contradictions, and retcons hidden inside Naruto, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. It helps the channel more than you think. Now let's rewind to the beginning of the myth, the birth of a legend. From the very first chapter of Naruto, the world was introduced to a man whose legend overshadowed everything that followed. A single act defined him, the sealing of the Nine Tails. That moment, when the fourth Hokage sacrificed himself to save his village, set the tone. The villagers spoke of him not as a man, but as a myth. A legendary shinobi, they said. The kind of figure children would grow up hearing stories about, the unreachable peak of power and courage. But here's where it gets interesting. The title God of Shinobi didn't exist for Minato. That came later when Hashirama was elevated to that status. Yet in the early manga and anime, the implication was crystal clear. Minato was the strongest shinobi the Leaf had ever produced, possibly the strongest alive. How do we know that? Because in the earliest arcs, even the other Hokage seemed to think so. The hints we all missed. When Orochimaru returned during the Chunin exams, Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage himself, said something that still hits hard today. If Minato were here, things would be different. Think about that. Hiruzen had lived under Hashirama, trained under Tobirama, and mentored Minato. He knew the power of every Hokage firsthand. Yet in that crucial moment, when facing the threat of a rogue Sannin, the third didn't wish for the first or the second to return. He wished for Minato. That line wasn't just nostalgia. It was a message. Minato was the apex. And it didn't stop there. When Orochimaru summoned the first and second Hokage to fight Hiruzen, the old man's reaction told us even more. He remarked that their strength felt exactly as he remembered it, implying that what we saw on screen was their full power. Now compare that to what came later in Shippuden, when Hashirama could summon titanic Buddhas capable of crushing mountains. The version we saw in the Chunin exams, that was nothing in comparison. But at the time, it wasn't written as a limitation. It was written as a clash between three Hokage at their peak, and Hiruzen won. Let that sink in. The man who defeated both the first and second Hokage at once feared only one other man, Minato Namikaze. The fourth's shadow over the war, even off-screen, Minato's feats became the stuff of legend. We didn't see the battle itself, but we heard the whispers. Minato single-handedly wiped out 1,000 stone shinobi. 1,000. At that point in the story, that was the most impressive feat anyone had ever achieved. No tailed beast, no ancient god, no Senju cell experiment, just raw speed, precision, and intellect. Kishimoto was building him up as the perfect warrior, the prodigy who became Hokage before turning 25, the genius strategist who combined deadly efficiency with compassion. And above all, the man who sacrificed himself to seal the Nine Tails and protect his newborn son. It was elegant storytelling. Naruto's entire identity, his suffering, his destiny, his power, was built upon the shadow of his father, the strongest Hokage ever known. Or so we thought. The cracks begin to show somewhere between the original Naruto and Shippuden. Things began to shift. Subtly at first, a line here, a reference there. but enough that attentive fans started to feel something change. The first real tremor came with the introduction of Yamato. When we learned about Hashirama cells, the entire power hierarchy began to warp. Suddenly, everything extraordinary, wood style, enhanced healing, unnatural stamina, traced back not to Minato, but to the first Hokage. Hashirama became the root of every miracle, and Yamato's existence was proof. That's when a quiet retcon started to take shape, one that would eventually rewrite the history of the leaf itself. Minato wasn't fading from memory, he was being replaced. The first seeds of the retcon. At first, it didn't seem intentional. Yamato's backstory was just meant to show the legacy of Konoha's dark experiments. But the more Kishimoto leaned into the myth of Hashirama's DNA, the more everything began to revolve around him. The concept of godlike power no longer belonged to the Yellow Flash. It belonged to the man who created life itself. Even Kakuzu's throwaway line, claiming he once fought the first Hokage, was meant as hype. But in hindsight, it was the beginning of a redefinition. If even ancient warriors like Kakuzu measured their worth by surviving a fight with Hashirama, then clearly the first had become something far beyond the rest. The idea of Hokage level was being rewritten, and the man who once defined it, Minato, was quietly being lowered a step. But here's the thing. It wasn't until way later that the real shift happened. Not during the Chunin exams, not even during the Kakuzu arc. The true retcon began with a mask and a lie. The man behind the mask. When Tobi appeared and claimed to be Madara Uchiha, everything changed. For the first time, we heard the words, "the Sage of Six Paths," whispered as something real. We learned about Indra and Ashura, the ancestral rivalry that had shaped all of shinobi history. And suddenly, the story wasn't about a great ninja who saved his village. It was about gods. Compared to that divine scale, even the Yellow Flash began to fade. That's where we'll pick up next, because the rise of Madara and Hashirama didn't just rewrite Naruto's past, it rewrote the very definition of power in the world of shinobi. But before we dive into that, if you're enjoying this deep dive so far, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss part 2, where we break down how and why Kishimoto changed everything we thought we knew about the strongest Hokage. Once, there was a flash of yellow that ended wars. But after the rewrite, that light was no longer divine. When legends became gods, it's hard to pinpoint the exact moment when Minato stopped being the strongest. It didn't happen with a single line or episode. It crept in like a shadow, scene by scene, retelling the myth of shinobi from the ground up. At first, we just heard names: Indra, Ashura, the Sage of Six Paths. They were vague, almost spiritual. But as Shippuden evolved, those names became blueprints for the entire power system. And when Kishimoto tied Naruto and Sasuke to that ancient bloodline, suddenly the Hokage were no longer the ceiling. They were stepping stones to something far greater. Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha weren't just strong men. They were avatars of the original gods. Their chakra, their ideals, their destinies, all echoes of the divine. Compared to that, Minato was human. Brilliant, yes. Heroic, absolutely. But human nonetheless. That's when the hierarchy flipped. The birth of the retcon, the 5 kg Summit arc, was the quiet turning point. Tobi, still pretending to be Madara, began to explain the truth about the Sage of Six Paths, his 2 sons, and the eternal war between the Uchiha and the Senju. And in that one monologue, Kishimoto rebooted the entire mythos. The strongest were no longer determined by talent, intellect, or even jutsu mastery. They were chosen by lineage. The divine bloodline became the ultimate power system. Minato, who had earned his strength through sheer brilliance and willpower, didn't fit into that new mold. He was an outlier, a genius who had reached the top without the right DNA. And that's why, as the world of Naruto expanded, Minato's legend had to shrink. Enter the true monsters. Then came Madara Uchiha's resurrection. Up to that point, we thought we'd seen power, pain destroying Konoha, Itachi's illusions bending reality, Jiraiya's sage mode. But when Madara appeared on the battlefield, all those benchmarks evaporated. He was untouchable. His chakra waves crushed entire armies. His fire jutsu blanketed miles of desert. He summoned meteors, plural. And just like that, every Hokage before him felt small. Even the legendary Yellow Flash couldn't compare to someone who could level mountains with a glance. It was Kishimoto's way of saying, "You thought Minato was a god. You haven't seen real gods yet." This wasn't just about scaling power for spectacle. It was about transforming Naruto from a story about ninjas into a story about mythology. The moment everything changed. You can pinpoint the exact frame when fans realized the hierarchy had been rewritten. Madara versus the 5 Kage. It wasn't even a fight, it was a demonstration. 5 of the strongest living shinobi united. And they couldn't touch him. He toyed with them, laughed at them, then dropped not 1, but 2 meteors on their heads, just because he could. And at that moment, every fan who had once believed that Minato Namikaze was the peak of shinobi power had to face the truth. The Yellow Flash was no longer the god of the ninja world. He was just one of its fallen legends. But why did Kishimoto do it? Here's where the debate begins. Some say it was a mistake, that Kishimoto robbed Minato of his mythical status to overinflate the late-game villains. Others argue it was genius, a necessary evolution to keep the story growing beyond its original limits. And in a way, both are right. Think about it. If Minato had remained the strongest, then Naruto's entire journey would have been capped at his father's shadow. He could never surpass him, never break free of that legend. But by making Hashirama and Madara literal demigods, Kishimoto created a new Mount Olympus. Now Naruto's destiny wasn't just to surpass his father, it was to surpass the gods themselves. That shift reframed the story from a tale of inheritance to a tale of ascension. Power versus legacy. Minato represented something that no retcon could erase. Legacy. Even as his power level was quietly demoted, his impact remained untouchable. He was the bridge between eras, between the old world of shinobi and the new world of gods and reincarnations. He was the man who faced the impossible, not with divine blood, but with pure conviction. Hashirama and Madara were born into destiny. Minato created his. That's what made him special, and why, even after all the power creep, his story still hits harder than almost anyone else's. But we're not done yet. Because this retcon didn't just change how we saw Minato, it changed how we saw the entire history of the Leaf Village. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, you're clearly part of the 1% who actually care about lore, not just fight scenes. So if you love deep dives like this one, drop a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because in Part 3, we're unpacking how this rewrite reshaped the entire mythology of Naruto, and why Minato's loss of power might secretly be the most powerful story choice of all. They took his crown, but they could never take his legend. The hidden genius of the retcon, it's easy to call it unfair. Minato Namikaze, the prodigy, the savior, the 4th Hokage, once hailed as the strongest ninja alive, suddenly overshadowed by titans from centuries past. But here's the thing. Kishimoto's decision wasn't random. It was narrative evolution. When Naruto began, The story was grounded, about humans, not gods. Ninjas bled, trained, sacrificed. Their limits defined their greatness. Minato embodied that perfectly. He wasn't born with a divine heritage or ancient bloodline. He built his legend. Every victory came from intellect, creativity, and relentless will. But as the series grew, as it explored destiny, reincarnation, and cosmic cycles, the stakes demanded something bigger. To show Naruto surpassing Minato wasn't enough. He had to surpass myth itself. That's what the retcon did. It didn't erase Minato's greatness. It reframed it. He wasn't dethroned. He was humanized. The mortal among gods. Think of the world by the end of Shippuden. You have demigods summoning meteors, resurrecting armies, and bending reality. And yet, the most emotional moments don't come from those gods. They come from Minato. The quiet smile when he meets Naruto again. The simple apology. You've grown up well, son. In a world now ruled by divine reincarnations, Minato reminded us what being human actually meant. He wasn't there to shatter mountains. He was there to heal a bond. That's what made him timeless. He represented the idea that heart can outshine power. So while Hashirama and Madara became deities of destruction, Minato became something even more powerful, a symbol of love, sacrifice, and humanity at its best. When strength stops being about power, let's be honest, by the end of the series, power had lost its meaning. When characters start throwing planets at each other, it's not about strength anymore. It's about scale. But Minato's strength was never about scale. It was about speed, precision, and purpose. Every move he made had intent, every fight, a reason, every death, a lesson. And maybe that's why his legend still endures. You can debate all day who's stronger, Hashirama, Madara, Naruto, Sasuke. But when fans talk about who they'd trust to protect the village, to lead, to sacrifice everything, the answer is always the same. Minato. Because he wasn't a god pretending to be human. He was a human who lived like a god. Legacy beyond power. The deeper you look, the more you realize something beautiful. Kishimoto didn't destroy Minato's legend. He immortalized it. By surrounding him with gods, he made Minato's humanity shine brighter. He turned him into a mirror, a reminder that true greatness isn't about divine power, but about choice. He chose to fight. He chose to protect. He chose to love, even at the cost of his life. And in a universe where fate dictated everything, Minato's defiance of destiny made him the ultimate anomaly. The gods were born to be great. Minato decided to be. The man who outshone the gods. Let's revisit that moment, the sealing of the Nine Tails. He knew he couldn't win. He knew he would die. And yet, he smiled. That's what separates Minato from everyone else. Not his speed, not his jutsu, his peace. He faced the end without fear, leaving behind a legacy that didn't depend on reincarnation or bloodlines. Just faith. In his son, in his village, and in the future. So when people argue about whether the retcon weakened him, they miss the point. Minato wasn't the god who lost his throne. He was the man who showed that you don't need one. The final flash, in the end, Minato Namikaze became something the story desperately needed, a grounding force, a reminder that power without heart means nothing. When the world went mad with chakra monsters, ancient sages, and cosmic wars, Minato remained the most human of them all. And that's why his name still echoes louder than almost anyone else's. He may not be the strongest, but he's the most unforgettable. So, next time someone tells you Hashirama was stronger or Madara more powerful, just remember, legends fade, gods fall, but the yellow flash never truly disappears. And if you made it all the way here, you're officially one of us. If you believe Minato still deserves his place among the greatest, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Minato isn't just a Hokage, he's the light that never dies. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay sharp, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next deep dive.